All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Jack C. Taylor Conference Center. If you're here in person, I'm Ray Spicer, CEO and publisher here at the Naval Institute. It's great to see so many familiar faces. Thanks for joining us, both in person and if you're online dialing in, welcome. I also welcome several former and current members of our Board of Trustees and Board of Directors for the Naval Institute, so it's great to see so many great people here. For over 150 years, the Institute has served as the independent forum for the sea services to provide the platform where ideas are debated, challenged, and refined, always in pursuit of a stronger, more capable Navy, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard. From the pages of our magazines to the Proceedings podcast to the daily reporting you see in USNI News, our team is committed to highlighting the critical challenges and opportunities facing America's maritime services. One of the most urgent challenges we've focused on this year is the state of our shipbuilding industrial base and the fleet that it supports. Earlier this year, we began the conversation with our February issue of Proceedings magazine, which was almost entirely focused on shipbuilding. The response to that issue made it clear that the topic deserved continued attention, so we decided to expand the dialogue beyond the page. In May, we hosted our first panel on the subject, followed by a second shipbuilding-focused issue of Proceedings in June. Today's event marks the second installment in a four-part series designed to bring together decision makers, uniform leaders, industry experts, and strategists to confront the complex challenges that will shape the future of the Navy. We are deeply grateful to Naval Institute Foundation trustee Steve Waters for making this series possible through his very generous philanthropy. The May session was a candid conversation about revitalizing shipbuilding, the shipbuilding industrial base. Today, we turn our attention to a closely related topic: how to accelerate unmanned systems by better aligning requirements, acquisition, and fleet integration. To set the stage for today's discussion, I'll ask our Navy Federal Executive Fellow at the Naval Institute, Lieutenant Commander Jim Halsell, to introduce the topic, and our distinguished moderator. Over to you, Jim.
Thank you, Admiral Spicer, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us, whether here in Annapolis or online. It's an honor to help open today's session in this important series on the future force structure of the United States Navy. One of the experiences that I've enjoyed most since I've been here at the Institute is the privilege of helping put discussions like this one together, helping track down points of contact in the global address list, helping develop guiding questions, and screening incoming live audience feedback questions on the internet, which can sometimes be scary. That brings us to this afternoon's topic: accelerating unmanned by bridging requirements, acquisition, and fleet integration. This conversation gets to the heart of a key challenge the Navy is facing: how to turn promising concepts into real, reliable capabilities in the fleet, faster and more effectively. At the Institute's annual meeting earlier this year in May, Admiral Harry Harris gave opening remarks, during which he included a clever one-liner about how sea power is America's insurance policy, but it doesn't renew itself. I'd like to think that hopefully our discussion today can contribute to finding a new way in which we can help renew that policy, but perhaps at a lower premium than what we've accomplished in the past. How do we define requirements that reflect operational needs 5 or 10 years from now? How do we avoid acquisition paralysis while still maintaining rigor and oversight? And perhaps most importantly, how do we ensure that unmanned platforms are not just designed and built, but actually integrated into how we train, operate, and fight? These are tough questions, but our panel today is uniquely positioned to wrestle with them. I'm pleased to introduce our moderator, Brent Sadler, Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Brent is a retired Navy captain, a submarine officer by background, like several of us, and the author of Naval Institute Press bestseller, U.S. Naval Power in the 21st Century, and his new book, Naval Power in Action. Captain Sadler and I previously had the pleasure of serving together when I was the International Training Officer at Naval Submarine Training Center Pacific, and he was the Defense Attaché at the U.S. Embassy in Malaysia. During one engagement, then Lieutenant Halsell was delivering what I thought was a particularly compelling briefing on submarine quality assurance to the Malaysian submarine leadership. I followed up with Captain Sadler after the fact, and he assured me that it had been the talk of the Malaysian staff. I'm not sure if that was a compliment or a warning, but I do know that that was the last time I was invited to speak in Malaysia. Captain Sadler's work spans naval strategy, defense budgeting, and the future of unmanned operations. He's no stranger to the complexities of fleet design and capability development, and we're fortunate to have him guide today's discussion. Captain Sadler, over to you.
Thank you very much, and it's great to be back, and also back in Annapolis, where many years ago I graduated. Also, Admiral Trink got ahead of me by a few years, which we'll get into the introductions later. But it's important to kind of take note where we are, kind of look on the chart and kind of note where we are and where we have to go to get to the next milestone. And that milestone that I think is most germane as I kind of set the tempo or the tempera of this discussion is that we don't have infinite time. Not driven by money, not driven by decisions, not driven by the reality of industrial pace to build things. Those are all important. The adversary in this case has a timeline that we have to adjust to. And so the key question is, how can we get more firepower out at sea in a way that really deters our adversary in Beijing, the Chinese Communist Party? One of the only options that we have available with the limited time before their own self, the Chinese self-assessed timeline in 2027, not to go to war, but to be able to go to war and prevail in a fight against us. That means we have to have more firepower at sea in 2 years. The foundations of industrial conditions to expand rapidly, those were other discussions. This is how do you get firepower out at pace. Before 2027, ideally, but certainly something needs to be sustained to early in the next decade. Unmanned systems, that's one of the most obvious and one of the most underinvested, in my estimation, until the recent time. And the gentlemen up on the stage are a part of this, and a lot of the good news that we're going to discuss. But there will always be a lot more work that we need to do to get firepower at sea. The promising note, 2021, in September, one of the unmanned vessels, larger Ranger, shot an SM-6 from a container. So we have proven it can be done. Now it's operationalizing it, learning about the sustainment, turning this into programs of record at scale that the Navy can employ with sailors. And I emphasize that with sailors, because even though the ships may be unmanned, someone still has to command and control them, and someone has to still maintain them, as we've learned from recent deployment of these same systems in the Western Pacific. And so now comes a little bit of the rules of the game for today. I'll shut up. This is not about me. It's about the gentlemen up here that are doing the nation's work both in industry and also in the U.S. Navy on this very important topic of accelerating unmanned systems to the fleet. And I'll do the introductions, a brief, very quick introductions. I'm going to go by alphabetical order, not by seniority, anything like that. Then we'll have prepared comments, starting with you, Admiral Trink, and then we'll work down for a few open comments to get your opening statements. And then I've got a few questions that I'll pose. But the whole while, please, in your mind, the real meat of this discussion is when you get to ask questions. There's microphones there. There's also questions from online, which I will be able to get here if it doesn't time out on me. And I will try, if there's many, to consolidate them into questions, pointed questions, to our panel. So with that, I'll start with Brian Elkowitz. Now, Brian and I have known each other for quite a long time. One of the submariners, additional submariners up here. Brian is currently the corporate director for Navy and undersea programs at Northrop Grumman, and government relations team and everything else. But he has to know the business of the company, and with his submarine background, understands what the needs are. Prior to joining Northrop Grumman in 2023, Brian was a Defense Intelligence senior executive serving as the Director of Fleet Integration at the Research and Development Support Activity, the OPNAV N2 N6 staff. Previously enjoyed, and I stress that, enjoyed, a 26-year career in the U.S. Navy Submarine Force. All the submariners understand what that means. There's a lot in there, but I'm going to highlight his command was on the U.S. Jimmy Carter. Those of us in here that know the business of submarining know exactly what kind of challenges that Brian has had to deal with and excel at. His ship received, while he was in command, a Presidential Unit Citation. I'll give you a little hint as to the level of importance, those missions that he was responsible. Other key roles included Deputy Director of Navy Liaison to House Representatives, so he understands Congress, Strategic Plans Advisor to the Office of Secretary of Defense, understands the politics and the organization inside the Pentagon. Next, I'm going to move over to Captain Matthew Lewis. Matt is currently the Program Manager for Unmanned Maritime Systems, PMS 406. He's a Westpac sailor, and with numerous operational and shoreside tours in the Pacific. He commanded the USS North Carolina, SSN 777, very lucky numbers. And I remember in your wardroom, I think it's like a Las Vegas kind of thing going on there, theme with one-armed bandits and everything. After numerous deployments to include on board the USS Oklahoma City and its home port of Guam. It's important also, as we kind of get in the question and answer, the importance operationally of Guam as the strategic hub of the Pacific. And where these units, these unmanned systems may find great utility. Questions that I definitely want to dig into. Served on multiple staffs. One of the other ones I just want to highlight, in the sake of time, was on the Dwight D. Eisenhower School of National Security and Resource Strategy. So understanding how industry and industrial policies and strategies come together, something that's going to be needed as we mature these technologies and industry together. Next, Captain Garrett Miller, Mustang, very illustrious long career. What's most important is his job right now, and that is the Commander of Surface Development Group 1, which again is going to be very relevant as you try to operationalize and deploy these units and see how the sailor system interaction plays and backfeeds into the development. He commanded USS Fitzgerald from 2017 to 2020. Important and challenging time, both in leadership but also systems knowledge to get that ship back out to the fleet very rapidly. Ashore, he's been posted at U.S. Central Command, a place that's been well known with the use of unmanned systems in the recent past with things like Task Force 5-9. Also at 4th Fleet in Mayport, Florida, perhaps a future similar Task Force 4-9. And most recently, the commanding officer of Regional Support Organization Pacific Northwest. And the most senior member on the stage, and not to be the least, but the Admiral Derek Trink, a 1992 graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, as I already kind of alluded to, a Bachelor of Science in Political Science, holds master's degrees from University of Maryland, Naval War College, in Newport, Rhode Island, and very germane to today's discussion. The Admiral is the director of N96, and is responsible for guiding the force structure and developments of the surface fleet. And that is a key customer and also key guiding role for where these systems are going to be used and the concepts and operations that they're going to have to execute, and then again the requirements that go into all that. So lots to discuss on that, Admiral. Look forward to digging in deeper. Previous assignments you can go into, there's lots of them, lots of command at sea as well. Was the Commander of Navy Personnel Command for Career Management, PERS 4, Strategic Plans, Policy, and Logistics at J5, J4 at U.S. Transportation Command. So there's a logistics aspect to this too that we might come back to from your roots. So with that, I will stop, and now it's really over to our panel's discussion. So Admiral, first over to you for a few minutes of opening comments.
Thanks very much. There are a lot of N96 alumni in the audience, and I appreciate you being here. Admiral Spicer asked, what am I working on, and what are some of the big things that I'm working on in N96 and the Surface Warfare Directorate? And honestly, this is probably the biggest, hairiest thing we have, is making sure that we deliver this capability alongside partners like the ones I have up on this stage to the sailors who will operate these unmanned systems alongside our manned ships and aircraft and submarines so that we can continue to deter the Chinese Communist Party. There is so much importance baked into that, and that is the newest thing, the most complicated thing we're working on. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks for moderating this.
Thank you, Admiral. Next.
All right, thanks, Brent. So I think this is a really fascinating time to be part of an organization that supports unmanned systems. I've been in the seat for about a year. I still don't have anything figured out, and I'm learning a ton every single day. And it's an incredibly challenging and exciting time to be here. I think one of the things that sort of encapsulates where we're at right now is this convergence of, I think, four things. The technology, I think, is there at the requisite level to be able to integrate and deliver unmanned capabilities. I think we have seen and heard across the board that industry's interest and ability to execute and support unmanned capabilities in the maritime environment and elsewhere, they are eager and willing to get after this problem set and deliver capabilities. everyone, as you alluded to earlier, the operational need, the time factor, the schedule, that operational demand is absolutely present, and we hear that from the fleet commanders and the combatant commanders that they want this sort of capability at the sailors' hands. And I think the last thing, which is really fascinating, and I think I've seen a lot of changes over the last year being in the seat, is when you look at the funding and the ability to the resources to go after and get after this problem set at scale. And so I think we are seeing the stars, if you will, these factors align, that we're at this nexus, that we have a really great opportunity to deliver these capabilities and deliver it in a way that will be impactful for our sailors.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Ryan?
Thanks, Brent. It's great to be here. Honored to be a part of this panel. Thank you, Naval Institute. As Brent said, been in industry for a couple of years, had close to 30 years in government as uniform and a civilian, and kind of had 3 observations I want to point out that I've seen. First is that industry and government, we still don't really understand each other. We speak different languages. We have a different view of risk. We often don't collaborate early enough on development of requirements, CONOPS, mission, design reference missions, those types of things. If we did that earlier and more, we would be able to move faster. And as we look at science and technology, the development type programs, we need to make sure that those, one, they're going after big, bold ideas. That's the whole point of having those types of programs. But they need to be linked to a specific fleet need or gap. Sometimes may not be a direct linkage, and that hurts us as we look to figure out where that program of record might land. So those are a couple of things. I'll talk briefly about them, and Brent, I know we've got some other things to be able to go into, but on the understanding and the language piece, key example that I saw, when I was a customer on the government side, I would often ask for a rough order of magnitude cost estimate, or ROM. Not really thinking a whole lot about it. Really, I was looking for kind of a swag, of what that might be. Is it 10 million or 100 million? So that I knew whether or not what I thought I wanted to get, I might be able to afford with the budget that I had. What I didn't realize until I got to industry is, a ROM process takes time and money that adds complexity to the industry side. They go through a formal process. Every company has a different version of different layers of how that works, but it takes sometimes weeks. And often there's angst about whether or not, when I tell, let's say, Captain Lewis in the UUV market, hey, we think the ROM's going to be 10 million, and we come back and we say 15 million, and in past people have said, wait, you said 10, what happened? Right, so there's that angst as well. On risk, it really comes down to contracting, right? And the government side, we often look at it from a firm fixed price contract is great because we know what it's going to cost. There's some fallacy in that, right? But when you're talking development work in the world of the uncrewed systems that often has immature requirements and or design, that adds risk. And if it's a fixed price contract, I didn't realize at the time in government, but industry looks at that and says, I have to change my behavior a little bit. I may not be as willing to do some things that I would if there were some kind of shared aspects to that development work. And then on the S&T side, I think one of our big problems is the transition of funding and being able to get it to operational use, as Brent talked about in his opening. The POM process is long. Many of you are much more versed in it than I am. I spent some time in N97. But if you've got a program that comes through its S&T phase and it's ready to transition and you don't have a already figured out landing spot and program of record already budgeted for, 2, 3, 4 years later, you're going to have the funding. The industry team's not going to want to carry that. We need to think about a bridge fund or some sort of in-year execution type of funding to allow organizations like the Surface Development Group or the UUV group up in Keyport to be able to receive those projects while it finds its home, operationalize them, use them, train on them, develop those CONOPS, and be able to go through there. Those are a few things that I've noticed in comparing my time in industry and in government.
Yeah, we might come back to the Valley of Death, and those that know, we can get into that a little later.
Yeah.
Captain Garrett?
Yeah, hey, Brent, appreciate you having me here today. My role is simply, my job is to operationalize these vessels and put them to use for the fleet commander. I think there's a couple other key things that we focus on. As much like Captain Lewis said, I think the timing is impeccable, where you've got, the funding, you've got the technology that's there, and you also have the need for it. And those three have come together in like a three-legged stool, and we're right there. And the other big thing that we're working on is the Surface Force Vision 2045 that I'm happy to talk a little bit about today as we continue this. That will lay out really how the unmanned surface vessels will play into the future of the surface fleet.
Absolutely. I think that'll be the first question after the second question, because the first question I'm going to turn it over to you, Admiral Trink, and it has to do with, from your vantage as in 96, how has the sentiment changed as you've kind of in the last few months with regards to unmanned systems? And one of the specific questions is, where do you see these counting in the battle force? Does it matter? And how do we more rationally think about counting them into the force structure in a macro sense?
So there's an ongoing debate about whether unmanned surface vessels, and presumably UUVs as well, count as battle force vessels. This is really going to go up through the Deputy Undersecretary of the Navy for Policy, or doesn't P, for adjudication. Part of my answer is it doesn't matter. I think it matters because we have reports that are required to the Congress, our corporate board, if you will. We have responsibilities to maintain a certain size battle force. And so we can get into a situation where we think, oh, we must count these as battle force ships and call them warships. In the end, what I really need to worry about is delivering capability to Commodore Miller and the Surface Force Commander, the Pacific Fleet Commander, Numbered Fleet Commanders. And I will certainly be a part of the conversation about whether these are battle force ships or not, but I'm not the most important part of that conversation. Right. And so the important thing is the capability and working with the partnerships to deliver that capability. And having a fulsome conversation where we look at the pros and cons of whether they are in the battle force, out of the battle force, or a new and separate category that is still reported to the Congress separately. I think there are pros and cons to all of those ideas.
Do you see a requirement kind of coming from Congress as a number of unmanned vessels like you see for carriers and amphibious?
Potentially. But I think that as we develop the capabilities that USVs can give the surface force, the need for such a number will reveal itself, or not. And so as we show the Congress and other leaders what we can do with USVs to complement and supplement the manned vessels of the fleet, the Congress will decide whether we have that reporting requirement or not. And if it becomes the right answer to do so, then we will. Okay. But again, the capability is what matters. And Commodore Miller mentioned the hybrid fleet. And the hybrid force and the surface force vision for 2045. How that comes together and how all of those capabilities mesh together and give capability to the warfighter, that's what really matters.
Great segue. So, Captain Miller, this is where I wanted to pick up, the vision, the 2045 vision, but with the deployment, the recent deployment, and even some of the field exercises or experimentation that's going on, where is the learning and where are the trends going in the operational employment of these systems that you're responsible for?
Yeah, I would say, in the past, these have been experimental, right? We're moving past that to be, operational. We've got a couple good goals between now and 2027, and one of those is to, operationalize small USVs in a non-traditional sea denial type of employment. We also have a goal to deploy the first hybrid carrier strike group by the end of next year. That will be one of our 4 vessels that were prototypes that are being operationalized and turned over to the fleet. And we will deploy that with one of our carrier strike groups by the end of next year with a comms type of package that will allow it to do some different things and provide that carrier and that strike group some needed capability that an unmanned system is uniquely capable of doing. And so that's where we're going between now and 27. We're looking through PMS 406 to acquire more of those vessels in the near term to be able to get after that, and then continue that with purpose-built vessels with the mask block ones, which Captain Lewis can talk about as we go forward in through up to 2045, where a significant portion of our fleet will be unmanned vessels. And part of the vision of what we are working and aiming to do is, normalizing not just, how we do operations, but we have to also the foundation of everything we do. So whether it is how we organize our forces and command and control and who runs those and how we operate those, all the way to our career paths, both enlisted and officer, for robotic autonomous systems within the fleet. And so that's where we're driving. You will expect to see by I would say SNA National a very detailed plan of what that looks like, but we're working very hard on making that happen.
Yeah, I want to come back to the human element, certainly with like the enlisted ratings and the roboticist, but also the officers, because I was lucky enough to come out and to talk to a few of the folks out in San Diego. I'd like to come back to that,
Sure.
about the learning and the speed of the learning on employing and sustaining these ships later. But I wanted to shift over, Captain Lewis, kind of the same question, but taking it under the waves. And the work that you've got, maybe a little bit, show us a little bit more detail about where programs are that are nearing, I guess, milestones, and what are some of the promising things that maybe we haven't really seen or heard much about. But again, I'm really interested on the undersea side of this.
Okay. So I think when we think of the undersea side, as some of you may be familiar with based on background and experience, that it doesn't translate well to the surface side. There's many more challenges. There's many other complications, and the operational employment is actually quite different of how we would use or employ those systems. On the operational side of where we're at, it's exciting that we had our first submarine deploy this year and use torpedo tube launch and recovered UUV. So that was really exciting for the fleet to get it in the hands, the sailors to use it, as the Commodore mentioned, and be able to learn what we can do, what extends the reach and the capability of the submarine, the host vessel, and how we might evolve that from a technological point, but also from an operational point. So that was really exciting. I think when you look beyond submarine hosted or a launch from a submarine platform, we still have a lot to learn from an operational sense. From a technology sense, I think commercial industry and the Navy has worked to advance that, and I think really a key point from one of our industry stakeholders, he told me something that resonated, was that the speed that we can operate now and we can go do these things is really founded off of a decade or two of work and development that has happened both between industry and DoD. And so some of these things, I'll say, are not new technologies, it's the convergence of it getting to a point that can deliver a capability. When we look at what can UUVs do in the undersea world, I think it's also contextualized by where we might want to do that. So when you look at the size of the Pacific, many of us don't look at globes anymore, actual hard things. Mm-hmm. And so you look at the size of the Pacific and you say, what are the distances and the complexity and how do we get it there? So those are aspects and attributes that we're looking at when you look at the large or the extra large UUVs that can deliver payloads. And how do we operationalize that? And as Brian mentioned, how do we work with industry to find that con-op, that employment that matches with the technology that we have right now?
Any platforms that you can kind of, that seem very promising to kind of get out, that'll be coming out in the next year or so?
So I'll say one which people may be familiar with, and I can explain a little bit more with folks afterwards as necessary or as interested, is Orca, extra large UV. Lots of lessons learned there that we have, and I think as the unmanned space has evolved over the last several years, we've learned a lot, and we learned a lot about what we set our goals at, what we set our sights at. We're also working in partnership with DIU on another extra large payload capacity UUV project. And so I think we're really excited to pursue that as well and see, again, where do we match this convergence with our fleet stakeholders and match those up so we hit the targets and don't overshoot either on the requirements or the con-op. So really excited for that.
Oh, great. All right, moving over to Brian. Brian, you brought up the Valley of Death. I put the term on it.
Yep.
That many may be familiar with, an article written 4 years ago. Time is flying the older that you get. But made famous in the past by a member of Congress that trying to get out from development, R&D, into program of record and sustainability. So I want to give you a chance to kind of dig into that, but also provide, your insights now that you're in the industry. What would work, may not work, but things that you're seeing, but also just the biggest shock is you're now on the other side of the equation. Some of the interesting insights and ways that Navy and industry might be able to partner better on the topic of developing and getting to see these unmanned systems.
Yeah, I'm going to riff off of what Matt just talked about for a second, and that is the DIU aspect, right? And their effort to try and move faster. The one that he's talking about, DIU Camp, named after Mike Camp, who sadly passed away earlier this year at Pac Fleet, to go after an extra large vehicle and payload capacity. That was pretty broad. And at some points, some of us in industry were like, well, what do you really want? Well, what can you give us, right? It's that do loop. But there was a lot of interactions between industry and Matt's team and the DIU team to understand what that was. And so I think from what I know of those that entered, my company, we put something in there as an entrant. I think they've got a pretty diverse panel of things to look at, which I think should be probably pretty exciting for them as a team. And as I mentioned, that transition aspect, DIU doing something fast, unconventional approach, but with a landing pad already kind of identified for being used at PMOS 406. So that's one way and one thing that I think has promise, and we're optimistic we'll do that. You asked kind of what surprised me. I would say one aspect is how expensive it is to do some of that design work and carry and execute some of that at sea testing. When you're doing that development and you're not sure what's going to happen, and you're doing it under a government sponsorship, there's the differences of who's liable and things that I never thought about when I was in uniform, right? And my team and Matt's team have had conversations about some of this, of if we're going to go test this, is it our insurance policy or is it government? And that sounds very pedantic when I'm sitting up here, but it ends up factoring in. And so the cost of that and what that means from a company to understand how they're going to invest their internal dollars to do those things, and the promise of whether or not there's a follow-on program or additional contracts is a key part. And that's an ever ongoing conversation that we have. Again, Matt and I talk pretty frequently, and our teams talk. So things like that. That's a big one. As far as the actual valley of death, if I had the solution, I probably wouldn't be sitting here, honestly.
Yeah.
So really, to me, the big one is having some funding available to be able to get that bridge. It's the year of execution piece, and there may be a plan to get it transitioned, but if you're not exactly lined up and you don't meet that number or that milestone by date with the funding, getting it into his hands or Commodore Dolbeck and Keyport at UUV Group, it's going to sit and wither, and that's a big one.
Yeah. So Captain Lewis and Captain Miller, I kind of want to tee this up to you, and Admiral, there's a chance also to weigh in on it because this gets to inner service more, but really, both of you gentlemen, the work that you're doing in development and also in the operation, how has the relationship been going with like the Marines as they develop their own kind of exquisite needs and capabilities? For their logistics, there was not too long ago, they demonstrated, or at least the movement of like a logistics type of vehicle, but even on the warfighting side, which the Marines have also been kind of doing, how's that relationship? And interested both from the developmental side and also kind of the operational, if there's much, if any, overlap or engagement.
I have had very little overlap. We've had some engagements, but as far as our orders and directives are very crystal clear in that world, and they don't overlap at this point.
Great.
So I think from the developmental side, this space is, again, very fascinating and complicated, and we want to, I think our tendency is to try and oversimplify it, both from a technology and from an operational side. So with respect to your question more specifically about the Marines, so we have, 406 has had a lot of interactions with the Marines, with the Army, the Coast Guard, other agencies, other agents or program offices within the Navy. And when we talk about it, it gets more so of the software and the autonomy side of it, of the things that we're working on for our products, our capabilities. There is clearly a interest across the Navy and across the DoD that we don't want to duplicate work where we already have capability that the government owns, the government has rights to, that we can take and use either for Marine application or Army application or take a land application and bring it to the sea. So there's lots of conversations going there. It gets to some things that are similar to what our Secretary of the Navy has talked about with the right to repair. How do we have the rights to be able to do that? How do we do licensing? How do we make sure that we work with industry or government purpose rights to be able to maximize the utility of it? So from a program office, we are looking for opportunities across the Navy, across the DoD, where we can capitalize on that.
Admiral, any thoughts on that? Maybe not so much with the Marine Corps, but also looking more broadly across the other maritime services, but also like the Air Force and even Army. Any interesting developments there that you're watching?
Yeah, I mean, going off of what Captain Lewis was saying, there is a joint interest in non-traditional sea denial. Interestingly, the lead for non-traditional sea denial in the OPNAV staff is a Marine general, Lee Meyer, who was my shipmate in N95. And so one of the places this leads us is to not be too narrow in our focus on what we want to do with our systems, right? So we think about strike and we think about electromagnetic maneuver warfare, but logistics is important as well, and getting logistics where you need it is incredibly difficult sometimes under fire. But if we can do that, then an expeditionary advanced base can project power into the sea and conduct non-traditional sea denial. And so it's incumbent on all of us to make sure we're not just sitting in our stovepipe, because that has been the bane of our existence for so long, that when we are delivering capability to sailors and to, say, Pacific Fleet, we're really delivering capability to the Indo-Pacific Command as well. And how is that right, not just for Admiral Kaler, but also for Admiral Paparo?
No, well said, Admiral. I did want to come back to the ratings for the enlisted sailors, the roboticists, and Admiral, also to come back to you, Chance, from your experience within the personnel side of this, as you also maybe comment on the development there with the capabilities. What are you learning so far on the qualifications, the certification for the enlisted sailors? They're going to have to operate and maintain these ships. And then if you have any insight on the officers, because I'm not aware of a similar type of specialty. You know, there's no roboticist warfare pin that I'm aware of yet with gold color.
No, we'll still be traditional, our core competencies will be surface warfare officers on the officer side.
Yep.
For the enlisted side, the robotic warfare specialist, they've made still very new. I just saw the career path for those a couple weeks ago. We've gone through a couple A schools that were actually at Carnegie Mellon. That's where they went to A school. Yeah. They're developing new A schools for them. And the idea is they're going to be able to operate and maintain robotic and autonomous systems for the fleet, for the Navy. And that what I am not sure about is underwater and where that lies, and maybe Captain Lewis can help me with that. But I know that's above the water. Everything that whether it's SUVs or UASs, it's all of those. And so that's where in the enlisted side that we're going. The conversion of ratings to that is happening now. There's a number of folks obviously very interested in that, and that's going very well. On the officer side for the SWOs, we have a hybrid career path. It is going to be due course, no longer off, in the special mission world or anything like that. And we are starting them from, the very beginning. In fact, I'll tell you, I'll finish this first and I'll tell you where we're going with that is, it's going to be very similar to our nuke pipeline. So instead of SWO in, it'll be SWO unmanned. And they will follow that same type of pipeline where you do one in conventional, one in unmanned, and so on and so forth. And that's where we're leading. We'll have two major commands that are going to be unmanned groups. And that's the path where we're going with the officers. So a clear path to eligibility for flag, and I think by mainstreaming it like that is a clear indication that this is our future and where we're going.
From a personnel, and just using my ancient history of, with a bit of personnel, that's the right way to do it. We've had policies in the past where if you did something non-traditional, we'd only let you do it once in your four first sea tours because we didn't want you to get too weird on us. This has to be mainstream. It can't be weird. It has to be mainstream. We have to grow these people, and to establish a career path that goes up to Major Command is the right way to go. As far as the human capital piece of this goes, we recognize the importance. We are investing in N96 in an AI and robotics and autonomous systems master's degree program at the Naval Postgraduate School. That's gonna. It'll take a little while for the money to take effect, but we're putting that money in place this year so that we can start investing in the folks who need those skills.
Right.
If we get left behind there, again, you said it earlier, sailors will operate these systems and they'll maintain these systems. And if they don't understand that and how they work, then we will get left behind.
The other piece that I'd like to add is the Naval Academy has really jumped on board with us, and we have started just this year a program where we are receiving about 30 to 40 ensigns before they go to BDOC. They will be with us for a year. And those ensigns, when they come out, they'll get a special AQD code where they are now, a hybrid officer that is going to start that path, and then they'll go to BDOC and do a single 3-year-long division officer tour and start that process. From my conversations with Captain Sundberg, he's at Naval Academy. He tells me that it's a very, very competitive system that they have going there and the program they have, and we're getting a lot of really fired up ensigns that are going to be the future of surface warfare.
Well, it's good to hear. A systems engineer here at the Naval Academy many years ago in robotics, so this is coming full circle in my heart on this. So good to hear. The reason I asked this we're talking about accelerating the development, and we're really overly the emphasis would seem to be on the procurement of the programmatic side, and I just want to go back to a conversation and a knife fight up on Capitol Hill that I was involved in. Why I ask. One was about the sustainability cost estimates, the O&M money that would go to this. The other is, okay, well, how do we get past the valley of death and the operation? What's the con-op? And this is not dealing with Navy folks. This was dealing with very young career staffers up on Capitol Hill and many Democratic and Republican members. 2020, 2021 timeframe, that's kind of where I'm talking about. And so the more that you can get the fidelity of these deployments, the more that your business case model, which now Brian out in the industry world understands, it's not easy to get the numbers that stand the test. This is really, all these things are going to come together and the acceleration is going to take off. So that's why I ask and why I think it's important. And that's a warning because now, the iPad from the online has actually started to explode. So for those folks out in the audience here in person, thank you for making the time to be here with us in Annapolis. Think of your questions, start making your way to the 2 microphones, and I'm going to take the first question from the iPad from online. Let's go with John Hammerer from the Naval Postgraduate School. He asks, how should the Navy be educating junior officers to acquire a comprehensive understanding of the complexity of shipbuilding as opposed to simply naval architecture, marine engineering, or ship construction? I will let this go to anyone on here, but we kind of touched on it a little bit. But when it comes to probably more for you with PMO, the engineering and the development side, what are the skill sets of the folks that you're engaging that you need to see more of in uniform as well as the civilians?
That's a challenging question. I think one of the aspects that you started, I think, introduced at the beginning was sort of shipbuilding and what we need from industry and how, as Brian mentioned, how do we match industry's capacity and capabilities to what we need from a Navy? And I think we're going to learn more. We know more from the submarine and shipbuilding side, from what trades we need, what workforce we need. When you look at unmanned, I think that will evolve a little bit, for sure, as we learn more and we ramp up the capacity to deliver unmanned capability. I think with that is some elements of, we talk about skill sets of AI, robotics, machine learning, software development. How do we bring some of that into shipbuilding that's maybe not there right now?
Okay, great. I'll go first over here.
I'm Harlan Ullman. I'm Also a commissioner on the future Navy commissioned by Congress, and I want to state that up front. We're looking at many of these issues. I hope we get underway soon. Brent made the critical question, what does it take to deter China? Is it the ability to blow up Beijing and Shanghai, sink their navy, destroy their military, economic warfare from within? And it seems to me, unless we get a pretty good idea of what it takes, how then do you design a strategy in which you put into unmanned systems? I'm not sure I understand what the overall strategy is and what is meant to be achieved operationally. I also wonder if you've been looking at things even more out of the box. For example, you probably know that Turkey and Portugal have drone carriers. Have we looked at a new ship class that might be able to have them? We've been looking at buying old 747s with 20 years of life left for about $10 or $15 million and making them drone carriers. So I wonder, in addition to the strategy, how these unmanned systems are going to fit in, how much are we really stretching the envelope? Because quite frankly, the budget system is going to make it impossible over the coming years with the size of debt and so forth to give us much running room. And so we better get the strategy right.
Well, sir, thanks for your service on the commission. I appreciate that. Thank you for your willingness to serve on the commission, sir. Part of as far as the systems and the drone carriers, I would say to do what, right? And so one of the things that we're thinking about is why are we acquiring and learning to employ robotic and autonomous systems? And it is to do certain things, to have certain capabilities, to augment our manned forces, to increase the capability of the fleet. What does it take to deter China is obviously a very broad question. And so what we need is the broadest credible capability for the United States military. And so you mentioned conflict with the Chinese homeland, and certainly deterrence includes that. But it also includes denying the enemy the ability to be confident in their plan. So if the enemy has a plan to invade an island, for instance, then our responsibility is to sow doubt in their mind and to deter them by denying them confidence in their plan. There are many joint parts of the equation that add up to that credible capability, and we have in the Navy a role to play in that. And it involves the surface force, it involves naval aviation, it certainly involves the naval submarine force. All of that comes together to make sure that not only are we building those capabilities, but we're giving operational commanders the options to put those capabilities together within an acceptable level of risk to achieve their mission. And in the end, make the Chinese Communist Party think, I have to rethink my plan, I'm not ready to go today.
We'll take the next question over here.
Hey, Sam LeGrand from USNI News. The MASC RFP just came out pretty recently, and I was wondering where y'all were on the idea of optionally manned for some of these larger MUSVs. I think there's an argument to be made that if you create crewing capacity and build spaces for people, you lose a lot of the goodness that comes from having an autonomous platform with less stuff on board, so you don't have to do the hoteling mission. Is that still an open question for y'all for some of these larger platforms that you're developing in the future, or is that settled business?
So if I can clarify, the question is, do we want optionally manned, or do we want to be fully unmanned?
Oh, for the MASC, right? So for whatever the replacement is for the LUSV, MUSV, there was a big, do we create this as a potential for like a junior command position now that like all the MCMs have gone away? Or is this like we're looking for a truck for 40-foot containers, people maybe not welcome?
Right. So the MASC area of interest that went out, right, that was, we want to go after unmanned, right? When you put in people on board, when you introduce that capability to operate with people on board, it creates a lot of other requirements and costs and complications. And so the solicitation that went out for industry, it was open, and we are eager to get proposals, and as we review them, to look at the proposals that don't have people on board. Because when you look at survivability with respect to hey, there's people on board, what's the impact, what are the services that need, we add a level of complexity and cost to that. So I think that is where we need to go, and we have the technology to get there, and working with the Commodore and the fleet users, we're finding that right balance as we progress there.
Commodore, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I
on
would
that?
just say we definitely want unmanned, period. I mean, it's that simple.
All right. All right, I'm going to go and take a couple of questions off the online, then I'll come back over here to, and I'm going to take two questions and merge them together. One is, part of this is from Captain Retired Robert Schwaneke, so I apologize if I said that wrong, and also from Lieutenant Commander Sam Mellick. So Robert and Sam, they're looking at the logistics piece, like how are you going to refuel? So this is probably more you, Commodore, kind of insights what you've seen in some of the early deployments, operations at sea. How are the refueling operations being done so that these things can stay at sea for 60, 90, 180 days and longer? And the other part of it really is the C2. What are some of the insights and the challenges in getting the C2 kind of architecture with
Sure.
the manned ship nearby?
Right, so the capability that we are desiring is for them to be able to refuel at sea. And that is, we do have that capability today. It's been demonstrated, and that is, that's where we're going with that. We do have two of the prototypes that are not capable of that right now. But again, those, we're going away from that and going towards the ability to refuel at sea. As far as C2 goes, there's two ways that we do that, and one of those is with a ship that is nearby that can do that with an afloat control unit, or from a UOC, an Unmanned Operations Center, which will do beyond line of sight control. And so those are the two ways that we traditionally control those. And again, they're autonomous vehicles, so they are also able to perform missions that you program into them and do those autonomously without any intervention whatsoever. So that's pretty much the way that we will do that.
Yeah.
Very briefly, I think that's part of the importance of an ongoing dialogue with industry, where it may not come up without the conversation actually happening, that we want these vessels to be able to be refueled at sea without dropping a human being on board to take the helm.
Yeah.
We don't want to have to go through that process. And so the close conversations we have with our industry partners allow us to ensure that we're driving toward the right goals.
And that many of these vessels also have the ability to, they carry enough to be operating alone without refueling for 30 plus days.
Yes.
And so, there's other options there too.
Yeah. Now, I'm familiar with being on a small boat in the middle of the Pacific or the North Atlantic. That can be kind of fun, a little spicy, so to speak, if you have to send someone over in a small boat to one of these in that kind of condition to refuel. So back to the audience. We'll start with you.
Sorry, I moved the thing because I'm very short. So my question is, obviously there's a lot of attention paid to small unmanned surface vessels. It seems like a good place to start. Has an obvious employment. We've seen it in Ukraine, right? But what I'm wondering is, to what extent is the community involved in unmanned surface warfare, looking at, like, for example, what the Russians are doing also. Like recently they have actually destroyed Ukrainian small USVs out at sea using aerial drones. And that's an obvious major problem because you can't shoot down small aerial drones with missiles very easily, and you could produce them in vast quantities at low cost. And you can employ them pretty easily from the backs of ships or from shore. So, and that's just one example. There's many things that Russia is doing that are maybe not being paid attention to as much as what Ukraine is being paid attention to. And I'm wondering, to what extent has anybody looked at that? Because obviously that's a major threat for small unmanned surface vessels, especially when you're talking about a country that has maybe 10 times our manufacturing capability, right, in small littoral areas where you could concentrate things like this.
If I may, part of your question I think is really interesting that we haven't touched on a lot is an unmanned vessel with another unmanned vessel. and kind of how to deal with that. And I think there's probably a little bit of that for everyone on this panel, but I did want to give Brian a chance from the industry perspective, and maybe there's a challenge that we're not thinking about. If we're talking about mating 2 different unmanned systems, is that a logarithmic challenge of problems just going up higher to manage it? Or are there some interesting stuff already going on in industry you can share with us?
I would say that from the mating of the two, as far as combining that, I don't look at that as a logarithmic challenge.
Yeah.
You're looking at a truck to be able to say, take the medium USV or the mask and make that, launching a series of small UASs, right, to be able to do things and extend the reach of the strike group or whatever you're looking to do, or make them the one-way attack drones that you were just talking about. I think the challenge area is exactly what he's highlighting, and we talked a little bit before we came out here, right, which is the counter unmanned problem, right, and who has responsibility for that across the fleet, across the joint force. That's not clear to me. There's certain lanes that it's clear, and that's more of a functional thing. We talked earlier about before we came out here. Key one is, say, nuclear weapons security, right? At the two bases for the submarine force, right? They've been doing counter UAS stuff very extensively for many years to protect security, but that's a functional thing that they've done and leading that. I don't believe, and maybe I'm wrong, and I'd love to hear if I'm wrong, that we have a counter unmanned systems effort, that's single. I mean, there's many different ones that are happening, so I think that's a challenge. I mean, you highlight a vulnerability, but at the same point, that's also part of the reason why we're putting these unmanned systems out there, right? So you don't have those things coming after the multi-billion-dollar ship or submarine. Yeah. They're going after that less valuable, potentially just a attritable type vessel.
Yeah.
I would say from an acquisition program office perspective, part of our challenge, and we hear it from leadership across government, into the gentleman's question, how do we acquire, change, update, modify the equipment that we have in any sort of time cycle that remains relevant, right? And so from an acquisition perspective, if you look at using other transaction authorities to be able to acquire and compete faster, how do we work with the fleet operators and our industry partners to be more agile, whether it's managing the requirements, being more open to requirements of going to industry and say, what's the best you can deliver, and then modifying our operational employment to meet that. But we clearly hear that our responsiveness and agility is absolutely at the forefront of our mind, both from the delivering the capability and the end user.
Did you have anything else?
I'll just say that the administration and department leadership view this as incredibly important, and the other transaction authority that we're being given is specifically to get at that agility and to ensure that we don't ossify into something that is incredibly slow and that we're stuck with for 45 years, and to ensure that we're doing something different. As far as the counter UAS piece, I think a lot of that will wind up at least partially baked into the Golden Dome for America as the lower layer of that. And with the authority given to the direct report program manager and the investment being made there, I think we'll see real progress.
And there's also a counter UAS testing going on the smalls that PMS 420 is involved in. So that is happening.
Okay. Is it fair to say that's kind of like a center of the effort for the afloat units, or?
No, I would say that is the center of the effort for the unmanned attack of it.
I will say, though, that going back to the original question, we are very concerned about the survivability of our unmanned systems. Even if they're designed to be one-way attack unmanned systems, we recognize that they need to get close enough to the adversary to affect the adversary, hopefully destroy the adversary, but they have to survive to do their mission. And so we are absolutely looking at the survivability of these systems and looking for ways to do that does not turn them into Aegis-equipped destroyers.
So we'll go next to gentleman over here.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. I'm Midshipman 4th Class Eli Shotland with Brown University. During and before World War II, the Imperial Japanese Army and Navy had 2 separate research bureaus that led to a lot of research duplication that had a big hand in why they lost the war. Given, as you said, sir, that the Marine unmanned effort and the Navy unmanned effort do not have a lot of communication. Is there a risk of research duplication? If so, what are some steps that could be taken to combat that?
Sure, so I'll go ahead and tackle that. So what I meant is that at the operational level, what I am involved in, I am not involved with the Marines very much when it comes to what orders we've been directed to go after. I am quite positive at the Sh2 levels that coordination is happening significantly. And so from my perspective, what I am tasked to go do is not with the Marine Corps. But I do believe, and I know that those communications and the way that they're approaching, the campaign development and how they're going to approach that are definitely communicating.
Thank you very much, sir.
Okay, I'm seeing an old boss of mine on the online questions, Admiral Michael Connor. If you're out there, I'm going to try and take your two questions and put them into one. I'll try my best. So from Mike Connor, he's now the CEO of Thayer Mahan. He's looking at one of the questions: how many of these unmanned platforms, the meaningful ones that can carry weapons, can we anticipate being employed or at sea by 2027? Best case. And the other part of this is, what lessons are we learning from the Ukrainians on mass producing, probably more of the smaller type of drones, but what lessons are we maybe getting from the Ukrainians and from the production side of this that might be germane for the discussion today?
Well, so we have floors for what we need, both in medium and small unmanned surface vessels, and presumably for unmanned underwater vessels as well. And certainly we'd like to reach beyond that floor for 2027 and then 2045. And so those are tied to Pacific Fleet missions that obviously have to be a bit vague about here. We're learning a lot from Ukraine, both on the Ukrainian side, also on the Russian side. And I like to think that as much as possible, we're taking those lessons. And so we are not just going with a single vendor. We are looking at how to keep production lines open and cranking out the craft that can do the jobs we need. And we're also ensuring that we continue to ask for the modularity that allows us to not go towards an exquisite platform that comes with a decades-long life cycle. And so, the MUSV, the mask, is designed to be something where I can bolt on and bolt off containerized payloads. And those payloads might be exquisite, but the vessel herself is not.
Yes, sir. I was going to say, I have to share a conversation the Coast Guard's having right now about very similar with containerization. So it'd be interesting to see in the coming months how the Coast Guard kind of comes to the same place where Navy's at in this. So there's a huge opportunity there, perhaps.
One of the things I would also add to that is that we look at, the way that our vision is going is, it's going to be a family of smalls and mediums as we go forward. So, we're not focusing on one. We're focusing on a family that are able to carry different payloads, different sizes that allow us to be able to deliver the right effects for the fleet commander going forward.
Perfect. Back into the auditorium, I think a familiar face to me. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. Robert Harris here, former naval person. A question for the three in the uniform up there. Put on your looking glass if you could. Let's look out to 2035. And assuming Congress is not a problem, what does the Navy look like in 2035, manned and unmanned?
I think we will still, as a SWO, I think we will still have the preeminent submarine force in the world. I think we will still have carrier strike groups that are oriented or constructed in many of the same ways they are today, augmented with unmanned systems, both in the air, on the surface, and under the sea. I think we will have unmanned surface vessels that are operating independently of carrier strike groups and surface action groups, because that is an aspect of realization of distributed maritime operations. And when we think about DMO, we have thought about SAGs and carrier strike groups and amphibious ready groups kind of spread all over the Pacific, for instance. But if we can further complicate a potential adversary's targeting and operational problem by having USVs all over the Pacific carrying different payloads, some of which might be hard to interpret for the adversary, I think that just makes, it gives our operational commanders many more options.
Did you have any?
I think where we see ourselves going, I want to answer your question, but I'll add some, at least my personal take on interpreting it, is where we see ourselves going. I'm a simple person, so I need to dumb things down for myself, as I think of smartphones and say 20 years ago, when smartphones came out, did we really know what they were going to turn into? Maybe Steve Jobs did, or some of these other brilliant people did. But nowhere did I think that we would be doing half of our computing or most of our computing on a device that we carried around with us and can't live without. And so I think what I see is we're at the precipice of getting these unmanned systems out there, and there's a ton of learning that we will do as we get them at some level of scale. And then we'll figure out the things we aren't even thinking about today and say, we can use it for this, it can help us here, it can be a force multiplier in this effect. And we'll look 10 years behind in the rearview mirror and say, wow, did we even recognize what we were doing, just like when the iPhone or smartphone came out 20 years ago?
Yeah, from my perspective, I think it'll allow us to play offense and defense together with the ability to be inside and outside of WESs. That's where I see the unmanned advantage and how we're going to be in by 2035.
Great answer, thank you.
So this is gonna have to be the final question. I'm gonna go with I'm sorry, sir, but we're gonna have to go with the gentleman that's been standing the longest, right over here.
Thanks, Brent. Hi, Admiral team. Paul Segrist, the Vice President for Maritime Strategy and Business for Leidos, and former 40, at the time 403, not 406. I'm thinking back to when I was in the seat, and we had a system that was supposed to deliver to the fleet, was having some challenges. And when I asked the question when I took that program over, I said, where's the guidance for the fleet? Oh, well, we're going to deliver it to the fleet and let them figure it out. Admiral, I think your comment earlier about, working through the ConOps and the way we're going to fight with the systems is really critical, and it's probably been a piece that we've been missing. Who has the dot right now for both surface and submarines to deliver that portion of the system of systems to the fleet? It's the old Rickoverism. If you can't name anybody responsible, you have nobody responsible.
To deliver which portion? The ConOps?
The ConOps, ConDep, the whole ConDep piece.
It's Commander Pacific Fleet right now, as far as how are we going to use those. Now, there's a head start at Pacific Fleet, but ComNav NavAF has also said, wait a minute, I have a use for these as well. And so the Fleet Forces and Navier and PAC Fleet are going to develop a 12-star ConEmp for Navy-wide employment of these systems. But because the pacing threat is in the Pacific, then Commander Pacific Fleet is the lead for employment. But some of the difference, I think, based on maybe some of the lessons we learned from your experience, are we have officers whose job it is to figure that out right now. And Commodore Miller, that's what he does on the surface side. The submariners have had that for a while as well. And so this is not just a paperwork drill where someone will come up with a coffee table book that no one really does anything with. There are officers who are, their primary job is to figure out how to use them and then feed back to program offices and resource sponsors so that I don't fail to resource what he needs and that we don't just, across the Potomac from one another, ignore the fleet.
And I would add to that, there is a definite mission for these. And so instead of, what you categorize as building and then giving it to the fleet to let them figure out what to do with it, it's quite the opposite of that. There's a mission, and then we are figuring out how to deliver what platforms to be able to solve that mission. I think that's a big difference.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you all for your questions, both online. There's only one that we couldn't get to, and those in the audience, again, sorry, one that couldn't get to. And most importantly, the gentleman up here on the stage that took the time out of their busy schedules, and of course, one that's making money in the business world. Again, thank you for your time.
You guys are getting paid too, come on.
And thank you. So appreciated the opportunity to moderate.
Yeah, well, so I want to take care of two things real quick before we break and head to our reception up on the topside terrace. One is to thank Brent for moderating this panel and thank our panelists for making the time for us. We know your time's precious, so we very much appreciate you escaping the building and coming over here to Annapolis. As a small token of our appreciation, we have a book for each of you entitled Planning for War at Sea, 400 Years of Great Power Competition, edited by Evan Wilson and Paul Kennedy. So a book for each of you to thank you for your participation today. Published by the U.S. Naval Institute Press, by the way, just a slight plug there. The other thing I wanted to do is recognize Lieutenant Commander Jim Halsell, who is our Navy Federal Executive Fellow, who came up here and introduced the moderator for our panel. And a lot of people don't understand the importance of these fellows to the Naval Institute. So for us, we have a staff of about 60, 65 people, none of whom are active duty, many of whom, actually most of whom, never served in the military. There are a few exceptions like myself, but a little bit removed from active duty. So it's really important that we have these Federal Executive Fellows here to kind of keep us grounded in what's going on with the services. So we had a Coast Guard Fellow, Kate Gillen, Lieutenant Commander, who's now off at command at sea, and Jim Halsell, submariner from the Navy, as our Federal Executive Fellow. And the work that they do is incredible. Not only do they keep us connected with what's going on with the Navy and Coast Guard, we put them to work, and they actually do a ton of work for us. So they serve on an editorial board, reviewing articles that are submitted to the Institute. We have a DARE program, which many of you are familiar with, where we bring in junior officers and others to look at 2 challenge questions that we get from the service chiefs every year as part of our West Conference. And they coordinate that effort. And last year alone, we had 400 applicants for that program, and we had to whittle it down to 60, 65 folks. And we had to do some last-minute heroics to make sure that we responded to some changes in leadership. And they just do a ton of work for us. So I just want to point out, where's Jim? He's hiding up there in the back, but I just want to recognize Jim and thank you for all you've done for the Naval Institute. And I know you're not welcome back in Malaysia, like you said, but you're welcome back here anytime. So thanks for all you've done for us, Jim. And thanks to all our members and supporters for being here in person, and also for those of you who were online tuning in. The bad part, if you're online tuning in, is you're going to miss our reception on the topside terrace, which is where we're all going now. So I invite you to join us up there. And again, thanks, and maybe a round of applause for this great panel. Thanks, everyone.